Hello again, this is Zandra. I'd like to apologize for not videoing last week, but I have been very busy and I've been having technological problems. But today I wanted to reflect back on the last video. I shared with you some issues about not being able to recall after my betrothal and my movement towards my betrothal nation. But as I reflected and shared with you on the last video, other things came back to me, and I remembered an encounter I had last year that showed me I had experienced me drowning when I was younger as an indigenous woman. So one of the things that I got caught up with was that memory associated with my betrothal and my leaving my nation, going to another nation, and then being pursued by the Mountie police. Because in the vision I had that keeps repeating since I did the last video, the person is in a Mountie police, Canadian Mountie police uniform, who watches me drowned in a lake or a swamp. And I have been debating with myself and my recall as to whether or not that image that keeps repeating, and I experienced it so fully last year, and it was a dreadful experience, to see myself drowning and somebody watching me drowned and not try to save me, and members of my nation in a boat unable to reach me because of the currents are too tough on the water. So when I talked about my betrothal and my leaving my nation last video, and not knowing what happened thereafter, there was no life, I wondered if my recalling that experience in such detail triggered the memory and the experience I experienced last year, where I didn't know how I was being pursued or why I was being pursued, and why I drowned as a young indigenous woman. Those debates have been in my head for some time, and when I first remembered the experience, or experienced it last year, I thought I was an indigenous Amerindian of the Southern Territory of the Nupoyo Nation, which is my mother's nation. But as I recalled, my memory of being an Algonquin young woman was the young woman who was drowning in that experience I had last year, the Algonquin young woman. So was I pursued, or were we pursued, my betrothed and myself? Were we pursued and I drowned in the Lake Spectacular because of the currents? And that is so vivid in my recall. So I wanted to share that with you, because one of the things I said last week the last video when I spoke about past lives, we are not in control of what memories come back to us. We experience in this form something that happened some time ago. And I have been trying to understand why my life ended in those dreams when I rode off with my betrothed. And as I said in that video, I don't know if we were pursued by the Americans or the Mountie police. But when I associated with the other experience I had of drowning and being observed drowning by someone in the attire of the Canadian Mountie police of that period, then I have to consider whether or not I was pursued, or we were pursued, when after my betrothal and we rode off by the Mountie police, and therefore my journey to the Lake Spectacular with the individual as adults in the modern age was a memory that we were both experiencing without knowing that it was associated with something that had happened 250, 300 years ago. I'm still trying to work out what has happened to my friend Jim, And whether or not he was a victim of COVID, I'm unable to reach him by email or by telephone. And I don't know if he is still with us. Because if he was, he would be in touch. And I have to make more inquiries because that's an important person to me. Well, and in my recalling of that past life journey with him, or with the Algonquin young man from the Bear Nation, then I have to reconcile myself that maybe we were both separated following our betrothal, and that my demise, my death, occurred in an awful way. And when we recall these things that we have no control over, I often ask myself, why do we, or why do we experience recalling things that we have no control over, except they happened at some point in our existence? And if we are to journey on dealing with different aspects of our past existences, then we have to understand them in the context they appear, but in the context as we recall them. I understand the journey of that experience, and I fulfilled it as an adult in this person, in this form, when I met the person again, or when I met the spirit of the person again. And my journey to Lake Spectacular was a very interesting one, because everything that happened was very much what I had experienced as another person that I had no control over. So one of the things I have been debating with myself in relation to recalling and expressing or sharing past lives journey, we have to consider it in the context of all the other episodes that we might have experienced at the period that the past life referred to. And when I recall the drowning, my drowning, at the hands or the observation of a monkey police, a Canadian monkey police, I thought I had no idea that it could have been related to another edition of my life, another experience. So I want you to think about when we experience past lives and we try to recall them in a context as they appear in different parts of our life. We must consider the relevance, and maybe my recalling the journey of my betrothal and not knowing what happened after the betrothal was relived in another context where my loss, my journey, my experience of drowning came to be through the experience of being the multiple dimensions I am, being the multiple persons that I have been the different journeys that I've taken in the different lives that I have existed in. And we must be able to distinguish or try and understand why these memories are coming back at this particular time in my life. I have no idea. I'm just trying to work it out. So I wanted to share that with you today as a way of concluding the past life journey in relation to being an Algonquin young woman. And when I say that, I remember very fully and very carefully the details of that experience as an Algonquin young woman, and remember it with a lot of fondness, and how important it was for me to have journeyed that. that period of my life in this realm. And I do appreciate the recalling of something that was positive that may have ended very badly. I don't know. But what has happened since the last video is that I cannot get out of my current thinking, my current being, the experience of the drowning that I experienced last year as an indigenous young woman running away from a Mountie police standing on the edge of the water on a rock with a dog and a whip or a gun in his hand, watching me struggle in the water as I leave the shore to escape whatever I was escaping from. That escape has been troubling me since I experienced it last year. And I still trying to work out whether it is me as an indigenous Nupuyo or an indigenous Algonquin. That will continue to be a recall that I am working with. But as I recall my journey to the Algonquin Nation Park and the Lake Spectacular and the events that happened around that I had experienced 200 to 300 years ago, I now believe that drowning related to me as a young woman who had just been betrothed but had been pursued by the Canadian Mountie Police. But how I'm dealing with it, it's a level of loss that I don't know what can be gained from recalling it, but I know it's important to me that I understand it and understand why I'm being asked, why I'm being driven to recall an event in my past life that happened 250 to 300 years ago. So for me, recalling it was very useful. Recalling the significance of the events that happened last year when I associated it with something completely different. And me trying to understand why the drowning occurred in my memory, in my dreams, in my visions last year. I have no idea. And it is just before the Lion's Portal. The Lion's Portal of August and the double moons in August last year arose a whole lot of stuff for me. And in journeying, I have realized that if I'm to do more work on the past lives, as I am trying to do, then I have to deal with what it provokes in me after a session as the last one. Because I have been struggling to try and merge the two events to see if they matter. But clearly they matter to me as an indigenous woman at some point in my existence. And I want us to remember that we who are indigenous have experienced all sorts of horrendous things. We still do as women, but in 200 to 300 years ago, whether I was an Algonquin or whether I was an Opoyo, we were pursued. We were hunted, we were harmed, and we experienced horrific things. How that plays a part in my life today, it helps me understand why I'm here. And I'm here to tell you stories that most of us remember but never share. Most of us struggle with dealing with it and never share. And I just felt I should share this with you. Next week, I will continue the past life, and probably link it with another event that happened around the same time. Because last year, when I experienced the drowning, and the person who triggered that memory in me was present in my life, and I said, I experienced this, and this person said, and who said I saved you? Because the person represented the mounted police. And he said, who said I saved you? And that really disturbed me. For someone who was getting a glimpse into a past life that I had experienced would come out with a statement and said, who said I saved you? So we have to be mindful that the people we encounter today that may have some relevance to our past life may continue the same damaging experiences they did 200 to 300 years ago, and we have no control over it. So the lesson I have learned is to be mindful of what that means to me today and why I need to distance myself from individuals or events that links me back to a period of my life or a previous existence that I could only recall and share with you. I thank you, and if you like what I have said today, or if it helps you remember something of your own past life, please subscribe and share with another. It is not an easy journey, as I said to you before. This episode was a good one. The others I have experienced, not so good. So the next video, it may be a slightly different edition of one of my past lives. I thank you and ask you to subscribe and share with another. Thank you. Bye-bye.